Welcome everyone to Video Chess Training. I'm International Master Will Paschall, and today we're doing a small review of our last Simul on lichess.org, which was played on February 12th, 2017. We had 20-player Simul. We won 12 games. You can see the score here: 12 wins, 5 draws, and 3 losses. Here at Video Chess Training, I like to do occasional reviews of either my Blitz stream or Simul stream that we can take a look at a few games. Sometimes we do more, sometimes less, depending on how complex, how long the games are. I've picked out 2 games to do extreme analysis of here. So, first of all, I wanted to take a look at this game against Hutaker. The first time I've played against him, and we are playing White in this game. We've got lichess up here. The engine is running. We can turn it off. We don't have to keep it turned on. I don't like to be overly reliant on the engine. Maybe in some positions we'll take a look at what the computer thinks, but I want to caution chess players who are learning the game that it is kind of tricky to get hooked on using the chess engine and letting it think for you. It's an important tool to help you improve, but it's also important to learn to think for yourself without the engine constantly running in the background. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. Rather than look at games where I beat on weaker players, I like to focus mostly on the games I don't win, and that is the case here. We take a look at a game that actually ends in a draw. I don't mean to be anticlimactic, but we can see the result up here, draw. Anyway, let's see what happened. I'm playing White. This is the first time I played this opponent. He's solidly rated 2097. So that's a candidate master, a little bit below candidate master strength. So we played d4, and my opponent played knight f6, c4, and g6. And ironically, just before this game was played, I had played a team championship game in the Grunfeld. And I wasn't really in the mood to face the Grunfeld. I was kind of hoping that Black would in fact played the King's Indian here. I played knight c3 anyway, allowing the Grunfeld. If I wanted to avoid the Grunfeld per se, I could play g3 or knight f3, but ultimately you can't really avoid Grunfeld type of positions where Black can later on play d5. So, knight c3, d5, we go into the Grunfeld, and I've played many different systems over the years, but there's never really been one I've been happy with. Probably my favorite was the modern exchange variation, which would go c takes d or knight f3, knight takes d5, e4, knight takes c3, b takes c3, bishop g7 or c5 when White plays knight f3, c5, rook b1. And this is a line that I had a lot of success with to a point, but the theory is immense. As you can see here, there's 3,600 games just here in this master database. If you go to ChessBase or some kind of commercial database, you're going to find maybe 5,000 plus tournament games that have been played in this position. So that requires, and all the main lines in the Grunfeld require a lot of preparation. So I decided to play something else, and bishop f4. This is also a very, very popular line. 2,400 games, so we're not really escaping from theory here, but it is a safer line for White. Basically, the idea is to develop the queen side quickly. In the Grunfeld defense, Black puts the bishop on g7, bishop g7, and intends to basically control the long diagonal. See here, the long diagonal h8 to a1. So White sort of preempts that with this bishop f4 and rook c1 in some cases, quickly developing the queen side. I think that strategically the idea is to get the queen side developed so that bishop on g7 doesn't really have that much effect on White's undeveloped queen side. So bishop g7. Now White has a bunch of different moves here. Knight f3. The position is often played with a move order involving like 4 knight f3 and then 5 bishop f4. It's slightly different. I chose to play rook c1, mobilizing the queen side. This, as you can see, rook c1 is less common than the move e3, but it's perfectly okay. We turn on the chess engine here just to get a peek at what it thinks. Really, the engine needs to run a very long time to get an accurate assessment, but the computer thinks that white stands slightly better. Both e3 and knight f3. Rook c1 is a move that's maybe controversial in the sense that sometimes that rook could be useful at another square, like d1, for example. So committing it to c1 early might be not as flexible as, say, playing e3. Black castles. Now we play e3. And as you can see here, black has lots of choices. c5 is the classical move. Fischer played the Grunfeld. Kasparov played the Grunfeld. There were very important games, in particular, in the matches between Kasparov and Karpov, where Kasparov defended this variation against bishop f4. This is one of... Karpov tried different stuff, but this is one of the key lines that he did have some success against Kasparov. So c6 seems passive, though playable. It transposes to a kind of Slav. Black plays c5. Bishop e6 is another interesting move, kind of trying to force white's hand. So c5, and basically white doesn't want to end up in an isolated queen pawn position where his bishop is just randomly placed on f4. And that's why, since we don't want to see this exchange c takes d, white has to preempt black by taking on c5. And usually black is able to get the pawn back. But as we can see here, there's many different moves. Bishop e6 is, I think Botvinnik played that. It's a very old move. Queen a5 is the game move, and apparently even knight a6 is a sacrifice of a pawn that's playable. So queen a5, and now normally white plays pawn takes pawn here, but I was reluctant to go into a variation that, well, let's say my opponent is 2100. He probably knows Grunfeld theory fairly well, so I was reluctant to go into the main line because I don't know the theory very deeply. In the event of c takes d, which is the main line, black has two moves. Knight e4 is one of them. Again, speaking of Botvinnik, I think there is an old Botvinnik game with rook d8. I was looking at this though. There's an interesting try here. Bishop c4, and now bishop e6 is the main move. But something I found interesting in this position, we see 4, 8, 10, 12 games, and we turn on the chess engine here. And a very interesting thing happens. 12 games in this relatively important theoretical position, where almost everyone played either e4, b4, an occasional queen a4, or sacrificing the queen with d takes e6, which is interesting. But what's stood out to me was that Stockfish, this chess engine here, wants to play king f1, and I think that's an interesting try. You know, maybe this might be a worthwhile novelty by the computer. It's obviously risky in a sense that the king is going to be stuck in the center, but it's not totally out of the realm of possibility, and something that does take place in these variations. There was a game last year between Luc Van Velde and Magnus Carlsen, where Van Velde also didn't castle and eventually developed his king's rook, something like h4, h5 later on. Different position, but the same theme, you know, that the king can not castle and white can still get a playable game. I thought here this is quite an interesting position, but maybe black has knight takes d5. This must be critical. Knight takes d5, and if we want to refute this idea of king f1 by the computer, this looks like the way to do it. Knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, and then e6, pinning our piece. Queen a6 is checked, but yeah, this looks like what you want to do in the Grunfeld. You want to play for the initiative, and maybe black has pretty good compensation around here for the sacrifice pawn. The king is stuck in the middle of the board. So I guess in most cases there's again a reason to be circumspect when the engine's saying something. It's not always good. You need to give it more time to think about the position. Here it looks like black has good compensation for the sacrifice pawn. So this novelty king f1 is probably not a novelty for good reason. White has played the more solid like e4, and the game goes on and on. There's even a recent game here, Conrad Holt versus cadent draw for black 1 after knight takes e4. Apparently this is, well, this is obviously, you know, computer analysis, but white gives the pawn back with knight e2, and the hits roll on and on here. Okay, let's get back. Josef Pinter, 1988, interesting game. Let's get back. I avoided mainline theory. This is a very complex variation, so I played the strange move in this position, queen a4, and it's very obscure. Probably if you want to get out of book, knight f3 is another move that's worthy of consideration. Played queen a4. When if he trades on a4, it's a little tough for him to get the pawn back. So maybe not bad, though. You could play queen takes a4, knight takes a4. I've seen this in similar positions. Yeah, this actually transposes some theory. Bishop d7. Bishop d7. I was looking at this a while back with one of my students, and it looks viable, though about equal objectively. Knight c3, and d takes c4. It's hard to maintain the pawn on c5 for white. D takes c4, bishop takes c4. Let's turn this engine off because it's slowing things down. Black has some compensation. Maybe he could play for rook c8 in some positions, going after that pawn. That is the main move. Salav, Korchnoi, lots of good players. Rashkovsky versus Dvoris. So this is pretty well known. But I think that this position is often reached by a slightly different order of moves. My opponent instead played, Ferentos played. Hungarian Grandmaster Joseph Ferentos, one of the many Hungarian Grandmasters who kind of specialized in the Grunfeld, like András Dorian and Pinter Josef. So b4 is a move. Eperjesy played this, International Master Laszlo Eperjesy played it against Ferentos. I guess that's maybe the best move here for white, but I wasn't aware of that, and I thought up a different idea in this position to kind of force black's hand. I mean, b4 looks a little bit weakening to me, but it's pretty obvious that black doesn't have very many squares for the queen, you know. So in the game Eperjesy versus Ferentos, black played queen b6. Obviously, he has a retreat square back to d8. If you play queen b6, you can go back to d8 from there. So Ferentos played that, but queen c6 is also possible for black. Again, looking at it with the chess engine, doesn't seem like white should really have an advantage here. But on the other hand, white's advantage is very small. A little bit of space, a little bit of development, but not much, actually. So the computer thinks it's equal after queen takes c6, b takes c6, holding on to the pawn. In any case, I didn't really want to risk this b4 weakening move. I just played a new idea here. Knight f3. I thought I played queen b5. Actually, queen b5 is interesting right away. I could have played this right away. I'm not sure if my move is better or not. Not that different. So we played knight f3, and black played knight c6. And now, the nice thing about queen b5 here is that it basically forces a trade of queens. But unlike the previous position, the move before, now he's put his knight on c6. So we force his knight to move away from that good square. After queen takes b5, c takes b5, and knight a5. Transposing to a game here from 2010 between two masters. I think that white is just microscopically better, but I think knight a5 was a good move, not to retreat back passively with knight b8. So, kind of a tough situation here. This guy Stansky played h3. I mean, it looks really slow to me in this position, but nevertheless, it's perfectly solid. Retains the h2 retreat square for the bishop on f4, but it feels like black will have enough counterplay. I mean, he's going to come to the c file, go to the c file with his rook, counterplay along the c file. The bishop will develop actively. I think the position is more or less equal, objectively. I decided to play bishop e5. It's a very safe move, basically guaranteeing the exchange of the Grunfeld bishop on g7, and then e6, which enables black to move his knight. We played knight d2. This was a little bit of a passive move by me. You know, perhaps in this position I should just develop with something like bishop e2. And you might say, well, why put the bishop on e2? Why not d3? The thing is that he's obviously going to move his knight from f6. And this route knight d7, he might end up hitting my bishop on d3 later on something like knight c5 or knight e5 down the line. So the bishop's less exposed on e2 in this position if I go here. Equal. This is more or less equal position. Knight d2 was a bit passive, giving up control of like e5 and d4. But when I'm playing these simuls, I don't really have a lot of time. b6, fixing the pawn there, giving his knight a retreat square. I don't really have any fault with black's play. And then b4, this was debatable by me, but I really wanted to send the knight back to a passive location. Knight to b7, bishop e2, again, not to go to d3, because that is more exposed. The problem here, I'd really like to keep my king in the center. If you're playing this position and you're white, it's an ending, the queens are off the board, you have relatively decent control of the center. It would be better to play bishop d3 and king e2. But I was concerned that if I play bishop d3 in this position, like bishop d3, something like knight to d7, bishop takes g7, king takes g7, and then intend to play king e2, black will have knight e5 and then be able to trade off my valuable bishop on d3. So I might have to play something like f4, which involves weakening my structure to some extent, but perhaps this is okay for white. The idea of f4 and trying to keep the king in the center with king e2. An alternative, bishop e2 and then knight d7. Alternatively, black could play knight e8, but I don't think he wants his knights both competing for the same square at d6. And on the surface, black looks a little bit passive here, but I don't think that that's a problem. You know, he's got that strong central pawn on d5. I mean, fundamentally, why is black okay here? Because I am a little better developed with the rook already to the open file and whatnot. My knights don't have a lot of squares. He's got a very strong central pawn at d5. I have double pawns that are a little bit useless. So we get to an interesting position here. Castles, knight d6, rook c2. I decided to play for the open file. Bishop b7, rook c1, and then he opposes me on the file. So position is equal. Even the computer says it's like dead equal. I already checked. And now knight d1. This was a bit passive, but my normal modus operandi here might be to play something like f4 again, preparing king f2, putting my pawns on the right color. But I started to be afraid of black maybe using the c4 outpost with knight c4. So I decided to just clear the air and maintain, you know, the control of c4. He doesn't have the ability to play knight to c4. And then e5, rook takes rook, rook takes rook, rook takes rook, bishop takes or knight takes, probably doesn't matter. Honestly, I really don't think it would matter. They're going to need to return to that square anyway, the next move. Now it's a question of centralizing the king for the ending. And I played a4. Again, like b4, maybe not absolutely essential here that I need to make that move, but I wanted to just be on the safe side that my b5 pawn is protected. I also wanted to maybe advance my pawns with a4, a5, and get a little bit of threats going on down the line, but it doesn't look that critical. Probably better to centralize my king right away here with king f1, king e1. The game is equal. Played a4, black played knight d6 back, I played king f1, and then king f6. Seems like best play by both sides centralizing their king. Position is equal, although black looks visually better because he doesn't have a doubled pawn. But he's a little cramped with that wedge of pawns with a4, b4, b5, and white is pretty well coordinated. Also, we should note that black's bishop is blocked by his own pawn. He does have that issue. I mean, my bishop is blocked by a pawn at b5, but that's only taking away one square. Whereas his bishop on d5 is pretty much stymied by the pawn on d5. So the whole thing revolves around this now. He plays d4. This is a very risky move for black. I was honestly scared because he has a passed pawn and a very well centralized king. But apparently this is a small mistake for black. This pawn becomes a weakness now. And very quickly I had some opportunities. I played knight b2 here. We turn on the chess engine, take a look here. Immediately I have knight b3. And I see, of course, this variation, something like knight b3, king d5. It's kind of scary, you know. I mean, he's starting to go into c4. So I would play knight b2. It's actually equal according to the computer. Not an equal looking position, is it? It looks very imbalanced. Instead I played knight b2 first. It probably doesn't matter. I want to blockade this pawn, and then apparently he blundered with knight to e5. So knight to e5, a very aggressive move, but I think black overstepped his limits here. The computer suggests bishop d5. Other moves like g5, putting the pawns on the correct color, because black has 3 pawns over there on the same color as his bishop, which isn't really ideal. So knight e5 is a mistake. I played f4, kicking him out, and then he just retreats back, and we gained control of the e5 square. And now the situation is pretty bad, because I could have gone after this pawn. I blundered with knight d3, and I had knight b3, just simply attacking the pawn. And I probably saw knight f5 or something like that and thought that he could protect it, but there's all sorts of problems for black here. It's very possible he's going to lose a pawn. Nevertheless, he would have drawing chances because there are the double pawns on the board for white. This should always ensure that even if he does lose a pawn, he'll still have good king position. Just a pawn down that's doubled is not necessarily decisive, but I should have played knight b3 here with all the squares covered, basically. This is covered, d4 is covered, c4 is covered. If king d5, the most important variation was this, which wasn't that easy to see. I mean, I probably saw this and then just gave up on it. But the problem is after knight e4, king e2. And I missed this, you know, because the point is not that obvious. You know, f5, king d3. And it's just a situation, ironically, he's simply dropping the pawn at d4. If we highlight this pawn here, at d4 is red, the weakness at d4. So missed it, and then Hutaker gets a chance to hang on. I was actually concerned later on that I was worse, but maybe just a little bit. After I missed this opportunity to win this pawn, I just blockaded. I had very little time playing a Simul against 20 players, and I think we were on the verge of being worse, but it didn't get too bad. I was concerned about how powerful his king is here. And then he played king e6, king c2, knight c3, going after this pawn. Trade bishops, knight goes back to a passive square. We play knight c6, and I don't know, you know, maybe king b3 here. If we take a look, I was concerned that his king is actually coming into d5, getting like super active on e4. So we can take a look what the engine thinks about this position. But objectively, I think that we're a little bit better. King b3 or knight c6. Yeah. So knight c6, knight takes a4, and then knight takes d4 check. I should have taken the pawn at a7, I guess, but I just didn't really think it was that clear. Knight takes d4 check, king d5, knight c6, king c4, and I could have checked him. No, knight takes a7. I had another move here, knight e5 apparently, which I overlooked. So you play knight e5 check, king takes b5, knight takes a7 check, and white ends up with the black king being shut in on a6. And that's very, very, very good. There's also some other tricks apparently. Knight e5 check, I didn't see this. King takes b5, king b3. It's like difficult to find that move. Very difficult to find that move. Winning the knight on a4. So I actually win a piece here. He has to sacrifice a piece. I did not see that line. Impossible to find with, when you're playing with just 5 seconds a move in a simul where there's not much time left. I just allowed a drawn knight endgame here. We're going back to the game now. I took on a7 and it's a draw. The pawns basically come off. Here he blundered again with knight c3, and we missed another chance with knight e5 check, knight e5 check, driving his king away from his knight, apparently. King takes b4, knight a c6 check, and you see all the squares are controlled. All these squares are controlled. So again, he loses a piece, and he's probably lost. But it was time pressure for both of us, and the game was marred by that. So back to the game, g4, knight e4, pawn takes pawn, and this is really a draw from here on out, it looks like. So I was never in serious trouble, though black was. We were only slightly worse case scenario now. He loses a pawn, but his king is too active, and this is a draw down to the last pieces. And draw. And you can actually play on here, but all right, let's take a look at the second game in the simul I wanted to look at. So an interesting struggle there, both in the opening and the ending. Draw, but really not a draw. I mean, chances for both sides better for me. Surprisingly, I thought I was worse when the game finished. I thought that I was the one who got unlucky, but it turned out the other way around. So we played this player also for the first time, Ezekiel Guti. We're playing white again. It's c4, f5. I think the Dutch is very good against c4. Against knight f3, it's more risky, because against knight f3, if you play knight f3, f5, there's Lisitzin gambit with e4. Let's see how that scores, by the way. Yes, white has a good score, 39% to 33. Quite solid. And d3. If you look down the statistics here, okay, b3 has a good score. I have no idea why b3's score is so good. And b4, that's kind of funny. But d3, this side is my favorite approach for white. Like a delayed e4. And I think when you play against the Dutch, philosophically, if you can get control of e4 in a Dutch type of position, you sort of defeated black's opening altogether, in the philosophical sense. That's why, like, the most challenging direct attempt against the Dutch is the Steinitz. Staunton gambit. Steinitz. The Staunton gambit with e4 is a direct attempt to challenge challenge black at e4. So that is really interesting. But c4, f5. Again, this is from my Sunday simul, February 12th. We're taking a look at this other game now. Carlsen Nakamura. Actually, Hikaru does like to play the Dutch sometimes. Not so much of late. d4, bishop g7, and now I played knight h3, the so-called Carlsbad variation. Let's see what we've got for games here. Nothing really recent. Karpov, Ratmir Holmov back in 1980. Lots of good company for me. Sarawan, Karpov, Salov, Wang Yui versus Ponomarev. I like knight h3 in the Leningrad when I can get it. d6 and now d5. This is the main line. But here my opponent seriously freaked me out. He played e5. And interestingly, the only game is Grandmaster Axel Rombaldoni against Ariane Cioli. And that's hard to believe, you know. I mean, like a very natural Leningrad move in this position that has been reached, well, I don't know, 65 games, and not a single player other than Cioli has played e5. And it looks playable for black. It's quite interesting. It actually transposes after d takes e. She played knight a6, which is committal and not really necessary, I think. Again, we go to the engine. I like Ezekiel's move better, the c6 move. It seems essential to me. there is some crazy idea here. This can't be possible, right? Bishop takes e6. Bishop takes b7. Well, that's remarkable. To try to sacrifice the exchange here. The engine's seriously thinking about this. This looks a little over the top, but wow. Bishop takes a8. Queen takes a8. Hard to believe this is sound. Black does get a pawn for it, but he's already down a pawn, so it's like a full exchange sacrifice. White's very weak on the white squares. Black's pieces are active, but I'm a little skeptical about this. This would be good in a blitz game maybe for black, but I think it's not realistic. Interesting try though. I wouldn't recommend it in anything slower than a 5-minute game for black. I like the move c6. Novelty, apparently. I haven't checked in ChessBase, but I don't think we're going to find too many games. And now this is the most fascinating part of this position, this move order by Ezekiel, that the temptation is very strong to play, say, like knight g5. But I found some fascinating variations here. I just looked at it for like 45 seconds during our game, I think, and then rejected it because queen e7, knight f7, and then the key idea is castles. And suddenly it just feels like white's falling way behind in development, and I've gone to all this trouble to bring my knight to f7 where it's like actually just wasting time. So apparently black has a lot of compensation here. Queen takes e6, for example, and we're just going to win the pawn back. Queen takes e6, bishop takes e6. Black has more development than white, and I'm not too convinced by this position. So, yeah, in a simul and in a fast game, I would be reluctant to go into knight g5. Even after analyzing extensively, it looks kind of dubious. So we opted to just play knight c3. And with knight c3, I actually transposed to theory. Now, would it have been better to play knight f4 is a valid question. And this transposes back to theory too. So at the end of the day, when you look at it and you say, okay, you know, why did nobody play Ezekiel's variation? I don't know, you know, because it looks like worst case scenario, black's just transposing back into Mikhail Gurevich territory here. Yasser versus Gurevich, Yarderson versus Gurevich, Salava Yeskas, there's all these games, and it just transposes back into book. So I just don't know, you know, white knight g5 doesn't work. I don't know what to say, you know. Computer gave me knight c3 question mark. I don't think so. I think it just didn't have time to analyze. Knight c3 is not question mark. It's just transposing into book. The computer didn't have enough time to analyze what was really going on there. The next move is probably question mark. Bishop takes e6. And here we have two ways to play the position. The first way is this queen b3, which I was afraid to play over the board because it looks kind of obviously a little bit weird, you know, with the bishop on e6. Apparently black scores okay after queen e7. Guarding b7. I don't like my queen on b3. So although this variation has a decent score for white, I'm not sure if it's the players or just, you know, random chance that's a small sample size. I like what Kaidanov did. You know, he just played b3. And this is again transposing back into like normal lines of the Leningrad Dutch. Black hasn't castled yet, but that's what he should probably play in this position, you know, just castle. And we're transposing back into theory. Kaidanov Gurevich, it was a good game. Black equalized. It's a standard line, very standard position here. Knight g5. And then Gurevich plays like queen e7, and the game ended in a draw. Black has eventually to play d5 usually later on, and doesn't mind giving up the white squared bishop because it is kind of hemmed in by his pawns and whatnot. Over the board, I wasn't sure if black has any sort of tricks like knight e4, but it just doesn't work. Knight e4 is just bad for black after knight takes. Knight takes e4. What I failed to see was actually how powerful this move is, knight takes d6 check, which basically, it just wins by force. So I think that over the board I was afraid of knight e4. Although I knew that there might be something for white, I didn't see exactly how it worked. So I opted to play this other move, bishop f4, but I think this is just bad for white. There are a whole bunch of games here, Grandmaster games, and strong master games, but nobody really good playing white. Oh, there is one Yusupov game where he managed to win, but I have to say that I think that white loses the opening advantage here. After bishop f4, bishop takes c4, we've lost the opening battle, and black is coming out ahead. So somehow Yusupov beat this guy in 2008, this Latvian player, but it doesn't, or Lithuanian, but it doesn't look good for white. You know, the best I can do is equalize here. So we follow some games. Queen takes d6, queen takes d6, bishop takes d6. Zhukova has played it for white. Blagievich, George Zul, all decent players. You just kind of wander into this position, and then you're like, wait, where did my advantage go? You know, and that's what happened to me against Ezekiel. So this is an interesting question now. Ezekiel played knight bd7, and knight a6 has been played. They've both been played. Most of the players played knight a6. Maybe to keep the D line open for the rook, but knight a6 also takes away the retreat square a6 from the black bishop. Bishop a6. That might be a useful option for black to have in reserve. So I think that the Ezekiel's move is slightly better. Knight bd7. And we've got a game here from 1991. Holmov playing black, taking out a 2200. Now I think I mess up a little bit later here. I castled. This is okay. Holmov castled queenside there, which is fine. But again, Ezekiel's move is probably stronger than Holmov's move. Knight b6. Black doesn't have to commit yet as far as castling, and I like knight b6. So that's good. And then we play b3 to get him out of there. And black could have played bishop a6. He could have played tricky moves like knight to d5. Let's take it to the engine here for a second. Knight fd5, knight bd5, bishop a6. So he had like 4 candidate moves in this position, and then plays the ultra solid bishop d5, which I really liked. I thought this guy is pretty tough, man. I mean, bishop d5, that's the most solid of the 4 moves, and I kind of like this. But I messed up here. I missed something very, very important. Knight takes d5, knight f takes d5, and then obviously I'm concerned about c3. But what I missed, and what I would have seen if I had a little more time, was that there's a very good way for white to equalize here, or maintain equality. And then I have to play rook c1. The idea being to put my rook on c2. And it's very logical, because black doesn't have a white squared bishop. And it sort of makes sense that the safe square for white would be c2. But having not enough time, I just didn't see this idea I would have normally found. I mean, the other possibility for white is to play, like, after knight f takes d5, rook a e1. But obviously that looks very awkward, because black's going to castle. So my rook on f1 looks kind of like, what's it doing? Anyway, this was a concrete blunder, rook d1. And after rook d1, I lose a very important tempo here. I mean, I guess I just looked at like knight c3 and said, okay, rook d2, everything's okay, but he's castling queenside. He's winning a key tempo, and that's why the move order is even better than Holmov's move order. Here we play bishop c5, knight c3. I really have to exchange rooks, and now black has unopposed control of the open file. Black stands better. He's actually winning a pawn. I have a threat of knight e6 here. Knight e6. And I don't know, maybe bishop d4, maybe some tricky move, but Ezekiel just goes to the 7th rank. That makes a lot of sense. a4 saving my outside pawn, and we reach this ending where white has 2 bishops The position is sort of imbalanced with pawns on both sides of the board, and I thought, well, this looks like the kind of situation we can hang on down a pawn with the bishops on the board, keeping the two bishops on the board. Black's king is a little bit open in the middle there with the two bishops and rook still lurking, so I think we should have held on here. We did, basically. A5, knight d7, bishop takes pawn, winning our pawn back. But black has the initiative with the rook on the 7th rank here. I played very well. Rook a2, b4, bishop c3, rook b1. And now I'm starting to be concerned about the f2, because he can build up threats against my f2. Still, it looks like this should be a draw. Knight f6, bishop b6, preparing b5, and then king d7. This was an essential move. This was really like only move, or he could even be worse, because b5 is coming so strongly. I guess he could play knight e4, or rook a1 trading rooks. But king d7 looks like a star move, starting to play for the endgame. Good king position. I like it. b5, bishop takes a5. He wins a pawn here. Take, take. And now I did something that I would definitely not do if I had more time. It looks like a situation where I should keep the bishop pair on the board. His king is very open. The bishop pair is very active. I'm down a pawn. I don't want to trade material. So this was a concrete mistake. With bishop d4, we have good drawing chances. After bishop takes, rook takes, I think that we're fighting for our lives here now. Like, more or less, practically a clear pawn down. On the plus side, our rook's pretty active. Check, king d6. I don't know, maybe he could have gone to e6 there. No, I would, yeah, maybe king e6. Because he's playing c5 next move anyway. Difficult to say. King e6, no, he drops the pawn. He has to play king d6. And then I play rook f7, king e6, rook c7, and then rook check, driving my bishop back, rook c1. The black is better. It's not winning, but he's better. And then after some maneuvering, plays h5. I don't know. It seems like you should put the pawn on dark squares here. If you want to, you see h6, a suggestion of the computer. I think this is a mistake, Ezekiel. h5, I decided not to move my pawns at all. I played rook c8, and then we're hunting these pawns from the back. We're going after his pawns. And I did fix that pawn eventually. Maybe h4 would have been best. Rook c2, king f1, we're just hanging out. He has good king position, but now rook g8, and we're threatening f4. And he doesn't really have a move in this position to maintain his advantage. It's equal now. King e4, f4 just in time, and I think I had analyzed this. King e3, pawn takes pawn, rook takes, and then like we have counterplay. Let's check this out. King e3, pawn takes pawn. I'm pretty sure I analyzed this during the game. Rook takes. Yeah, we just start taking his pawns. I don't think there's anything too fancy here. Rook takes g6. I don't think I saw a rook d8, but rook takes g6 should be enough to hold on. King f3, rook takes c6. Yeah, this is a draw. So going back to the game, knight c4 was played, and I said during the game I was short of time. I don't really like making this exchange or something to that effect, and I was right. I should have just played king f2 or rook takes g6 here. Would have been easier not to give up my good piece. This bishop is better than the knight in this position, but this may be good enough to hang on. Bishop takes c4, rook takes c4, rook takes g6, and we restore material equality. The black's king is very, very good. There's a position here after king f3, king e1, rook c2. Now I don't know if he had a better move. There was some discussion by the engine with rook c1, I think. I don't think it should really matter, rook c1. Rook d4 kind of makes sense, cutting my king off as well. Then I can play rook g5. I think this is a drawn ending. Rook c1 check, king d2, and the computer said rook g1. He does drive my king away here, to away from the king side, if he plays for a win on the king side. But it still seems like there's going to be too much simplification here. Rook g5, rook takes g3, we get the a5 or the f5 pawn. Rook takes h5, king takes f4. Technical ending, it's probably a draw, though white has to be very, very careful. Black's king position is pretty good. So I think I'd have to be very accurate here, but it should be a draw. Table base unknown. Big mistake for me in this position. My bishop was a good defender, and I think this knight is not so easy to use. And knight and rook are not that easy to coordinate. Just like queen and knight are a good combination, rook and bishop are a good combination. Rook and knight are not notoriously great, so I should keep my rook and bishop combination here. They work very well together. Big mistake playing bishop takes c4 and giving black winning chances again. Rook takes g6, king f3, and we reached a funny position here at the end. He plays h4. I thought and thought and thought, and then okay, I'm sure this is a draw now. Rook g6, c5, h5, rook h2, rook c6, king e3, threatening mate. And I was sitting there and I said, well, I just have to check him, you know, and this is a draw. I'm sure this is a drawn position. But I've made several mouse slips lately. This is another one. To lose this game at the end of the Simul was kind of painful. One of the last games I was playing, I think. It's a draw. I could even play king f1, actually. But I didn't really want to move my king from its centralized position. I want to keep my king where it can kind of catch either the f-pawn or the c-pawn, depending. So rook e6 check was my preferred move in this position, and obviously I saw black was threatening mate in one, but I don't think he can make progress here. It looks like the h-pawn will keep him tied down, and I'll have a lot of checks and whatnot, so it's just too difficult for black to win here. It's basically a dead draw, but instead I mouse slipped rook d6, dropped the rook too early on the way to e6, and Ezekiel checkmated me with rook h1. Happens. It was my fourth mouse slip of the week, I think, but that's alright. Just painful to have it happen in the Simul after such a good game, such an interesting struggle. Anyway, thanks for joining us here at Video Chess Training. We will be back playing live as we do every day during the week on lichess, and also you can check out this Simul that I played every Sunday. I play on lichess at 6:30 p.m. Central European Time. Thanks, guys. Please donate and support the channel with the PayPal donation if you can afford it. If anyone's interested in personal training, you can find me at my email, videochesstrainer@gmail.com. Just hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you can take away something from it. And again, thanks for watching my live streams here. Bye-bye.